As for my main inspirations, Dishonored without a doubt is the number one inspiration for this. I mean, honestly, for all the textures, for everything I'm going for, I played this game when it came out, gosh, like 12 years ago now. Played through it a million times. I 100%ed the game. I got all the achievements, even like the Dunwall City Trials. I remember had some really crazy achievements that were pretty difficult to do on an Xbox controller because I was playing on Xbox at that time. And I love the game so much. I put countless hours into it. And yeah, and I 100%ed it. I still go back and play it some. So long before I ever even decided to do art, Dishonored, I think the art style always stuck out to me because I think maybe at a brief glance, it looks, especially most games around that time, most AAA games, none of them were going for from what I remember, no one was really going for a sort of painterly 3D style or a stylized 3D style. You know, it was kind of just going for realism, pushing graphics. You know, I think of Halo 3, Modern Warfare 1 and 2, all great games, but I can't really think of any that were, again, especially AAA studios with 3D graphics that were playing around with materials, the stylization of them and things like that. In Dishonored, which I'll get into later, but the character design as well is super stylized, and I absolutely love it. But you'll see here, actually this is a good example. I think at a glance, it looks like maybe a little more generic, a little less stylized. But then as you zoom in and you pay attention to how they rendered this metal, for instance, you can almost see brushwork. You know, it almost looks like individual brushstrokes rather than something that's trying to go for realism. And I absolutely love that. Same thing in, you know, the metal, for instance, right? You've got all these blotches. It almost looks like gouache, you know, or watercolor, something like that. I mean, I'm kind of just going to repeat myself here, but same thing as the brickwork, same thing as these stones here. And then even the clouds. I mean, it could have just been whatever, you know, they weren't able to render at the highest resolution. The materials weren't able to have a lot of detail on them. So maybe the clouds looking a little blotchy, a little like watercolor. Maybe that just comes from the fact that the game is old, but to me, it felt intentional. It seemed intentional. I mean, especially when I look at this door here, when I look at the way they render the wood, when I look at the way they render the metal. I mean, I'll go into this more later, but if I look at something like, you know, Arcane in the way they render metal, for instance, which there's no doubt in anyone's mind that this is stylized, that this is, you know, going for a stylized metallic render. If I go to the door here, I mean, it almost looks identical in terms of the brushwork and things like that. And that kind of brings me to, actually, before I go on, I want to mention that for the weapons workshop, and for me kind of putting some extra blood on the weapons so that it seems like, you know, once again, they've been used. There's a little dirt on them. There's some blood on them. It just adds context to the world of this painting. You know, it feels a little more like lived in, a little more like there's life there. I mean, but yeah, the textures I was going for in terms of the cuts, sort of the dirt and grime, and then the blood, as well as just the metallic rendering of the metal itself. I mean, I was 100% aping how they do it here. Obviously, there's a harsher highlight on this blade. The lighting setup is different, but actually, I think this is a better example right here. Yeah, I wanted this sort of matte, splattered blood look. That's what I was really going for when it comes to these weapons right here. But something else I want to highlight, something that has stuck out to me, and then I'll get to these other inspirations, is that I noticed they would emphasize the edges a lot of things. And what I mean by that is you'll see there's this sort of porthole, I guess you could say, right here. And basically you'll notice that along the edge, this raised edge right here of this ring, there is a higher value, which just means like it's closer to a white than it is to a black, which makes it stand out more, all along the edge. There's these sort of highlighting, you know, the edges. And I think that stuck out to me subconsciously because I played a lot of World of Warcraft, especially during Wrath and during Cataclysm. I played a lot of World of Warcraft, and something in Warcraft art is, well, one, they do these very exaggerated kind of big cuts, as you can see here and on this texture here, and even on this throne here and here, which, as I mentioned earlier, you know, I wanted to sort of replicate on my weapons. But the main thing that you'll notice is they emphasize the edges. You know, you've got these nice highlights, even if it's in shadow, even in the darker sections, you've got the edges highlighted, emphasized, even on pieces of paper. You know, it doesn't have to be metal. You'll see they'll just, for whatever reason, I'm not really quite sure, you know, who, I don't know if it was Chris Metzen or who originally, you know, kind of went with that, or where they got their inspiration from, but I think subconsciously I really loved that as a kid. And I've never played League, but if memory serves me right, a lot of the founders of Blizzard actually created Riot. So I think it makes sense that a lot of the artistic direction and design is pretty similar across the two games. And same thing I've noticed in, again, I haven't played League, but I've noticed in looking at art assets and things like that, you've got these edges that are highlighted with a higher value. So again, maybe it's the same or similar artists who worked at Blizzard who made these decisions here. Maybe they came to that conclusion on their own. I'm not really sure, but all I know is that that has always stuck out to me. And it's not as apparent maybe in this one, but in small things like here, like in these drawers, even along the edges of the woodwork back here, or even along the edges of these tools, you'll see that I tried to do the same thing because it's just a personal preference. But that's why I made those decisions. Actually, same here, you can see in this stonework. I tried the same thing, emphasize edge. I even tried to get some of these cross pattern is not the right word, but that's the word that's coming to my mind right here, or they sort of bring the highlight across, you know, the brickwork or something like that. Because if I go back to, where's it at? If I go back to the League example, they'll sometimes sort of bring the edges across here and here. And then if I go to some of the work done for Arcane, like if I go to Jinx's rocket, you'll notice that there is not only a lot of edge emphasis, but you'll notice they'll sort of try and bring that highlight, you know, across somewhat, right across the object somewhat. Yeah, and honestly, going on to Arcane in general, once again, inspiration for how they rendered this sort of matte metal look. Absolutely loved this, so you know, I kind of wanted to shoot for that as well. Similar to the Dishonored example, I really like how they rendered the wood, and I definitely wanted to go for that for myself. And then another big thing with Arcane that I absolutely loved is just the amount of texture. The amount of texture you see is fantastic. They just use a lot of different brushes, different sizes. Some almost look more like a dry brush. Some are almost just like a thicker, you know, maybe a thick gouache or something like that. And I spent a lot of time, I've probably made over maybe, let's say 200 brushes. I mean, a lot of them were variations, but probably about 200 different brushes across Photoshop and Procreate to try and get a similar look where you have areas that are very opaque, which means they're not see-through. And then you have other areas where they're less opaque, right? It's a little more watercolory and less gouache, and you can see basically some of the value, some of the deeper values or lighter values coming through whatever color they overlaid on top, which I absolutely love. And I absolutely, in my own, you know, right, I'm trying to kind of come across where you know you have sections where it's opaque here, but it sort of tapers out almost, right, where it becomes a little more transparent and less opaque. But at the same time, I do like those large splashes of just different value opaque brush strokes. Same thing you can see here, even with the wall behind it. Obviously, sometimes you need a little smoother transition. Sometimes it just looks nicer than something a little more abrupt. But if I'm rendering, you know, a metallic surface or something like that, you'll see I tried to go for a little more, let's say, brutish, you know, look to the whole thing. Another inspiration actually was the Star Wars: The Clone Wars TV show. Same thing. I won't, and I'm kind of going to repeat myself, but these are all things that I've just, I think, internalized and absolutely love. But is all of the brushwork, right? It's not trying to go for realism. It's quite stylized. It looks like there's a lot of texture as well on metals and things like that. But even on like this sort of, I don't know, maybe leather armor, let's say, you know, it looks very weathered. It's not very clean and pristine, and it looks like it was painted by an artist. You know, it looks like a brush handled it. Same thing. This is from the movie, actually. You can see in the matte painting for the background. I mean, you can see giant brush strokes all across the board. A lot of it is quite opaque. Looks similar to gouache again. And then even here, they kind of did the same thing. You can see emphasized edges, emphasized edge, emphasized edge, which again, I think goes back to just long before I painted or anything like that. I think I picked these things up because these sorts of, you know, shows and games really stuck out in my mind. And then another inspiration is Guild Wars and the art from Guild Wars, or from the Guild Wars games. I played a lot of Guild Wars 2. It doesn't come through it's not as similar to what I'm doing right now, but in terms of texture, in terms of variety of texture, absolutely just really giving more of a shout out. This is kind of more of just an inspiration in general, but I'm sure some of it will probably come through. Actually, one example is a lot of the key art that's done. The guy's name is Kakai Kotaki, I believe. I'll put all the links down for any artist's work who I use in the video below. Want to make sure everyone gets credited, but I've been a long time fan of his work, and he works monochromatically a lot of the time. Maybe he'll have a splash of another color, but a lot of the artwork he does is, or at least for Guild Wars, is monochrome, which basically is just focusing on one color, right? And if I go back over here, you'll see that largely, well, actually, maybe I have other paintings that maybe are better examples, but this is a better example of two colors, right? I've got what appears to be a green, something a little warmer in the foreground, and then something that appears to be blue. It's a little bit duller, a little colder in the midground. Although, actually, both of these are a green. This is just a little more of a saturated green, and then this is the exact same hue, but just desaturated. So the idea is for it to appear a little bit bluer. It doesn't have to look like, you know, a deep blue, but the idea was to have it appear a little bit more blue. But in fact, I just used the same color. And then for the weapons workshop, I very much was going for you know, just an orange, I guess kind of orange to brown kind of feel. That I wanted to get across the warmth of the Hunter's Dream and the workshop in general. And I hope I was able to communicate that. And if I record more of these, you'll see that I, for the most part, tried to stick with one color, and maybe two, but really just one for each area, because I don't know how much I want to talk about what I want the final project to be, because I already know what I want it to be. I've had it mapped out for years, but maybe I don't want to spoil that. But basically, there are different areas I want to communicate and convey from the game, and they'll sort of be matched up by their color scheme. That's the general idea. A few other examples really fast before I go on. Once again, a matte painting from Arcane. I really like the mix of opaque and then sort of transparent washes and brushstrokes for things like you know, just the background of a wall. I'm trying to think what that material would be called, but you can see I'm definitely aping that here as much as I can. And then there's a canceled video game, I believe. I think it's canceled. I think it was called Project Black or something like that. Clearly the artists of that game were inspired by something along the lines of Dishonored, Arcane, whatever, because they also really like that sort of painterly textured look. You even got, I don't know if these are emphasizing the edges, that might just be chipped paint or something like that, because it doesn't seem like they're doing it as much here. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, I didn't actually go for it here, but well, one, this specific iteration of this, like, oh, imagining Bloodborne as an animated project, this is, I think, my third iteration of it. I started the first project, oh man, at this point, like 4 or 5 years ago, when I'd only kind of just been getting into art. It's kind of getting down, drawing and painting a little bit. And this was before Arcane came out, but I love Dishonored so much. I really wanted to go for this style, you know, sort of oil painterly, maybe gouache poster color painterly look for the project. But you know, my ambition was there, but my skills were not even close. I just wasn't there yet skill wise. And then I was trying to work on it slowly over some years. And then I don't know when Arcane came out. I think it was like 2 years ago at this point. And when Arcane came out, I got really discouraged because I loved the show, thought it was awesome, thought the art was fantastic, but the art was also kind of exactly what I was going for in my own project. And you know, I thought like, oh my gosh, like I didn't get this done in time. Now this thing's come out. It's really popular. It's very successful, as it should be. You know, respect to everyone who's on that project. But I thought, oh, I'm just gonna look like I'm trying to copy Arcane now, even though I was actually inspired by Dishonored. And it just really discouraged me. I thought, like, what's the point of putting it? And I kind of got in my head too much. What's the point of putting this out there? So I abandoned that project, and then I actually pivoted to a different style based off of a movie called Klaus, which is pretty funny because it's a kids movie. It's like a Christmas holidays kids movie. I'll probably cover that in a separate video because this one's already getting pretty long. But yeah, I'd kind of abandoned that, and actually I lost all of those files. I don't have any files from the first version because I was in school and I was having to constantly make space on my iPad, and so I would just delete old files. And because I wasn't using the Bloodborne files, sadly version 1.0 is deleted. But I do have some stuff saved from the second attempt, which, as I said, I'll get into that later. But one kind of final thing I wanted to bring up is another idea I've always had in my head, especially as, you know, movie studios and artists are getting to be a bit more bold and things like that. And rather than just going for a very clean, refined Disney Pixar look, people are realizing, hey, you know, we can have a lot more texture on our 3D characters. We can have them look like, you know, clay or something like that. For Bloodborne specifically, I really loved the idea as if like the characters almost looked like they were molded out of clay, almost if it was like a high production stop motion thing. So maybe the characters would have these beautiful just globs of clay, where you've got these raised sections that looks like, again, just layers of clay have been slapped together. But then if they were painted, you know, with a more textural look, again, something like Dishonored. But I actually did at one point try doing an attempt to make it look almost like it was made out of clay, or maybe even like thick, you know, strokes of acrylic or something like that slapped together. And again, I'll get into that more in another video. But I just wanted to bring it up because I really like that idea, and here's a lot of good examples. You know, I think especially having the characters like Gehrman or like the Cleric Beast or something like that, having a lot of these, you know, just like beautiful, rough, almost unfinished pieces of clay with a textural painting on top. I think that would look beautiful, and I think it would fit the atmosphere of Bloodborne really well. Obviously, I think if I were to actually, I'm sure if a studio is greenlighting this project, that's probably going to turn a lot of people off. It's even more stylized than something like Arcane. you know, I don't know how many people, what the intersection of people who like the look of stop motion is, who like the look of almost unrefined stop motion, unrefined clay, and then who also like Bloodborne. There might not be a lot of crossover there, but that was an idea I had in the back of my head. I'm not sure at what point I had this idea in my head, because I went back and rewatched Arcane not too long ago, and oh, would you look at that? They used sort of clay-like dolls for the intro, for the opening of the show. So maybe this time, I actually did steal from them a bit. Also, if anyone who worked at Fortiche ever sees one of these videos, please let me know if someone was deeply inspired by Arcane, who like one of the main artists, one of the main art directors or something. Because the whole time I remember when I first watched that show, again, I never played League, didn't know anything about the show, about the characters or anything, but the whole time I was just thinking about Dishonored. Honestly, even some of the architectural design, sort of Art Nouveau inspired, slash some areas are more like French inspired, like Parisian architecture in Arcane. But the whole time I couldn't help thinking about, I'm like, okay, someone had to have played Dishonored and loved it, and then went to work on Arcane, right? So if anyone knows just the answer to that, please let me know. And then another painting, this actually painting is from a Love, Death, and Robots episode. I forget the name of it, but it's on Netflix, and I'll put the credit if I can find the artist who did that as well. Anyway, thanks so much for listening, if you got all the way through to the end, to my crazy rants about art projects that I really love. And yeah, I'll try and keep this up for at least a few more episodes if I can. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.